My blood turned to ice the moment Amanda slid the glossy photographs across the polished mahogany dining table. Each picture captured me sitting in a cafe or restaurant leaning forward, sometimes touching an arm, sometimes smiling. To anyone not looking closely, it might have seemed damning. My mother-in-law Eleanor gasped so loudly it seemed to swallow all the air in the room. Amanda's voice oozed with triumph as she said, "Look at these." While David has been working himself to exhaustion, Sophie has been running around town with other men. She placed her hand on David's shoulder possessively, almost as if she were trying to cement the shift in loyalty right then and there. On his other side sat Jessica, the mistress. He thought I didn't know about the woman he had been sleeping with for months. Amanda had orchestrated the scene perfectly, casting herself as the righteous accuser, David as the wronged husband, and me as the villainess cornered in the spotlight. I sat there watching them all, my throat dry, but my mind startlingly calm. My name is Sophie Bennett. I am 32 years old, and this twisted dinner is the night my husband's family thought they had destroyed me. But it was also the night I began to teach them the most important lesson they would ever learn. I glanced at the faces around me. 8 years of my life poured into this family dinners, holidays, birthdays, sacrifices I had made silently without complaint. And here they were circling me like vultures, desperate to believe I was guilty of the same kind of betrayal they had been quietly cultivating behind my back. Eleanor, usually so meticulous about appearances, held a photo between trembling fingers. "Sophie, how could you? We welcomed you into our family," she whispered, voice breaking with perfectly rehearsed disappointment. Once those words would have cut me open. Once I would have cried, begging for understanding. But that night, I only observed her performance like a critic watching an uninspired stage play. Amanda slammed her hand against the table. "What do you have to say for yourself?" I lifted my glass and took a deliberate sip of water, allowing the silence to stretch. My eyes drifted across the table to David. He wouldn't meet my gaze. His parents looked devastated, though George, his father, seemed more uncomfortable than angry. Amanda, however, was radiant in her righteousness. "Nice pictures," I said, finally setting my glass down. "The lighting is excellent. You must have paid your private investigator quite a lot." Amanda's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. This wasn't the tearful denial she had rehearsed in her head. "That's all you have to say," she snapped. "You're not even going to deny it." I reached into my purse. Everyone stiffened, expecting tissues or maybe a crumpled confession letter. Instead, I pulled out my tablet and laid it gently on the table. The screen was dark, reflecting their anxious faces back at them. "Why would I deny it?" My voice remained calm. "Those men you see in the photos, they're all divorce lawyers." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda stuttered, "What?" Her confidence began to crack. I leaned forward, pointing to each photograph with surgical precision. "That's James Morrison, one of the best family lawyers in the city. This one here is Michael Turner, an expert in infidelity cases. And this," I tapped another glossy image, "is William Parker, known for tracking hidden assets before divorce." Amanda's face drained of color. David shifted in his seat, his glass suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. "You see," I continued softly, "I discovered David's affair 3 months ago. I decided to prepare properly." "You're lying," Amanda whispered, though uncertainty clouded her once bright eyes. I tapped the tablet, awake, the glow illuminating the polished wood. Dozens of emails, signed agreements, and legal notes filled the screen. "The wonderful thing about legal consultations," I said evenly, "is that there's always documentation." I scrolled slowly, deliberately savoring the growing tension. "But that's not even the most interesting part," I added, finally turning my eyes on David. Eleanor's voice wavered. "What do you mean?" I smiled faintly. "During one of these meetings, I learned something fascinating about recent property transfers in this family. Lots of money and houses shifting hands, new companies popping up, papers signed under vague pretenses." George's hand twitched nervously. David's brows furrowed as he turned to his father. "Dad, is that why you had me sign those papers last month? You said it was just routine family business." The truth dawned on him and his face crumbled. His family wasn't just helping him cheat. They were hiding assets, preparing to leave me with nothing. "David, sweetheart, we were only protecting you," Eleanor began, but I cut her off. "Actually, what you were doing is called fraud." My lips curved into a thin smile. "And my lawyers have documented everything. Amanda collapsed into her chair, her grand scheme unraveling before her eyes. She whispered hoarsely, "You knew. You knew this whole time." I stood slowly gathering my belongings. "Next time you hire a private investigator, make sure they're not working for both sides." My heels struck the hardwood like a metronome as I walked out. At the doorway, I turned back, meeting Amanda's wide, panicked eyes. "Thank you for the photos. They'll make excellent evidence." Only when I slid into my car outside did I finally allow myself a private smile. They thought they had cornered me. They thought they had written my ending, but they had no idea what was coming. The days that followed were chaos. My phone buzzed relentlessly, angry threats mixed with desperate pleas. Amanda's messages shifted from rage to panic. "You can't do this to us. We're family." That word family echoed bitterly in my mind. They hadn't treated me like family when they schemed to leave me with nothing. I archived her message without replying and returned to my preparations. 3 weeks later, the confrontation moved from the dining table to a conference room lined with oak shelves and leather chairs. James Morrison's office exuded authority and calm, exactly what I needed. I reviewed the evidence spread before me, waiting. Right on schedule, David walked in with his lawyer Eleanor and George close behind. Amanda trailed them, attempting to project confidence, though the tremble in her hands betrayed her. Mrs. Bennett James greeted me with a polite nod. "Shall we begin?" I watched David's expression as James presented our case, each suspicious property transfer, each hastily created company, each deliberate attempt to cut me out. Eleanor clutched George's arm when James mentioned the possibility of criminal charges. "This is nonsense," David's lawyer argued. "These were ordinary family business decisions." I leaned forward, sliding over a folder. "Interesting, because these records show my name was removed from family assets exactly 3 months ago, the same time David began his affair. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" George shifted uncomfortably. He had always cared too much about reputation to withstand scandal. Now James said firmly, "We can pursue this criminally, or you can reach a reasonable settlement today. Your choice." The room erupted. Eleanor cried. Amanda screamed about betrayal. George demanded his personal lawyer. David sat hollowed-out, arrogance stripped away. When James slid the settlement proposal across the table, David hesitated. "Sign it," George said quietly. "We can't risk this getting out." Amanda made a final attempt to claw back dignity. "Those photos she flaunted, those meetings in public." I laughed softly. "Of course. I wanted you to see them. Every coffee, every dinner, I knew you had me followed. I just made sure your investigator captured exactly what I wanted you to see." For the first time, silence consumed Amanda. They had been played at their own game. As the papers were signed one by one, I rose to leave. David's voice stopped me. "When did you become so calculating?" I turned at the doorway, my eyes steady. "I learned from the best, didn't I? Family taught me." The irony hung in the air as I walked out, lighter than I had felt in months. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about showing them they never had the power to break you. The first night after the settlement, I barely slept. Not because of anxiety, those days had passed, but because of the adrenaline. My body felt as though it had been running a marathon for months, and now standing at the finish line, I wasn't sure how to stop moving. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling of my now half-empty marital home, I thought about what it meant to lose, and what it meant to win. On paper, I had won. The assets that were mine by right were secured, my future protected. But inside, I wrestled with something more complicated: grief. Grief not for David. He had stopped being my husband long before the papers were signed, but grief for the woman I had been. The woman who believed in family dinners, in loyalty, in the sanctity of a marriage vow. The woman who trusted. That woman had died quietly over the past 3 months, and I hadn't held a funeral for her. Now her ghost lay beside me, reminding me that once upon a time I had loved this man, loved this family, loved the idea of belonging somewhere. I pressed my palms against my eyes, holding back the sting of tears. Winning doesn't erase pain. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, but it does make the bleeding stop. The following week, movers came to the house. I stood in the doorway, arms folded, as they carried out boxes of my belongings. The walls, once filled with framed family photos, looked bare. I left them behind. Why would I take reminders of a family that had used me as a pawn? Amanda had once said to me at some smug Sunday brunch, "Family is everything." I had smiled back then, swallowing the bitterness that always coated her words. Family to Amanda meant power. Family meant alliances and appearances. Family meant choosing loyalty only when it served her. I thought about her as I closed the door on that house for the last time. Amanda, the sister-in-law who had tried to annihilate me at that dinner table, had in fact handed me the very weapon I needed. Her photos, her self-satisfaction, her arrogance, they had become the rope that unraveled their schemes. She didn't even realize it. Maybe she never would. The days blurred after that. Meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, real estate agents. My new apartment was smaller but brighter, perched on the 12th floor with a balcony that overlooked the city skyline. At night, I would stand outside with a glass of wine, the wind tugging at my hair, and feel both alone and free. Freedom is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It slips in quietly like dawn, painting the walls in pale light, until one morning you realize you are no longer in darkness. One afternoon, as I unpacked my new life from cardboard boxes, my phone buzzed with a text. The sender surprised me, Jessica. "It's done. Thank you for showing me the truth about him." I stared at the message for a long time. Jessica, the mistress who once sat smirking at my humiliation, had become an unlikely ally. I hadn't planned it that way. But the moment I showed her the evidence of David's pattern, his promises to discard her once his assets were secure, her illusions shattered, just as mine once had. Sometimes enemies become allies, not out of love, but out of shared betrayal. And in that fragile, bitter bond, there is a strange kind of solidarity. Weeks passed, then months. Life began to settle, though every so often the shadows of my past flickered across my present. I would run into acquaintances who asked too many questions. I would see David's name in financial news columns, a shadow of his former self, and feel a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Not pity, not satisfaction. Perhaps closure, though even that word felt too neat for the messy knot in my chest. 6 months after the settlement, I found myself sitting on the balcony with a cup of coffee, the city waking up below me. The air smelled of rain. My phone buzzed with another unexpected message, again from Jessica. "You won't believe who I just saw at Riverside Cafe. Amanda." She pretended not to notice me. I smiled faintly. Of course she would pretend. Amanda, who once thrived on spectacle, now reduced to avoiding eye contact in public. The family facade had crumbled. George had retired early, citing health reasons, but everyone whispered it was shame. Eleanor busied herself with charity galas, trying desperately to polish a tarnished reputation. And Amanda? Amanda had been demoted to an accountant in a small firm, a far cry from her executive post. Karma, I thought, has perfect timing. Later that day, I received a call from James Morrison, my lawyer, my shield through it all. "Sophie," he said warmly, "the last of the transfers are complete. Everything's officially settled." I thanked him, my voice steady, though part of me trembled. It was truly over. "You know," James added, his tone thoughtful, "in all my years practicing law, I've never seen someone handle betrayal with such strategic precision. Have you ever considered a career change?" I laughed, but his words lingered. I had discovered something inside myself I hadn't known was there. A steel spine, a calculating patience, an ability to see 10 moves ahead. They had tried to break me, but in breaking, I had become something stronger. That weekend, I met Laura, my oldest friend, for lunch. She had been my confidant through the entire ordeal, the one person who knew every detail. "Have you heard?" she asked as soon as she slid into the booth. "David's been demoted. Apparently the board didn't appreciate the way he handled things during the divorce." I shook my head. "I'm not surprised. He always thought he was smarter than everyone else." Laura smirked. "Well, he wasn't smarter than you." Her words hit me deeper than I expected. I had spent years in that family, second-guessing myself, silencing my instincts, doubting my worth. To hear someone remind me that I had won not just the case but myself back felt like an exhale I had been holding for far too long. After lunch, Laura leaned forward. "So how's the new venture going?" I felt a flicker of pride. After the settlement, I had used part of my share to start a consulting firm helping other women navigate divorces and financial disputes. "We just opened a second office," I told her, smiling. Laura grinned. Look at you. From betrayed wife to empire builder. I thought about the woman I had been a year earlier. Naive, hopeful, blind to the cracks in her marriage. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger. Not bitter, not hardened beyond recognition, but wiser. Still, even in strength, there are scars. That evening, as I reviewed applications for a mentorship program at my firm, my phone buzzed again. This time the message was from Eleanor. I miss you. The family isn't the same without you. I stared at it for a long moment, then archived it without replying. Some bridges once burned must never be rebuilt. A month later, the doorbell rang. Jessica stood there with a bottle of wine in her hand. Our monthly catch-up had become a strange tradition. We sat on my couch, glasses in hand, and laughed about things that once would have destroyed us. To karma, Jessica toasted. I clinked my glass against hers. She smirked. David's dating someone new. Poor girl has no idea what she's getting into. I raised an eyebrow. Should we warn her? Jessica laughed, her voice sharp but amused. Something tells me she'll figure it out. Besides, I hear she's clever. Maybe clever enough to see through him sooner than we did. We shared a knowing look, and I realized something profound. Sometimes the best revenge isn't burning everything behind you. Sometimes it's simply moving forward, living well, and watching karma unravel what you left behind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in orange and gold, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. The family that had once defined me no longer held power over me. They had tried to strip me bare, but in their betrayal, they had unknowingly given me the greatest gift, myself. It's strange how silence can feel louder than words. Months after the divorce was finalized, I began to notice the absence of noise. The absence of accusation, of whispered plotting, of Amanda's shrill voice echoing in my ears. At first that silence felt foreign, like I had stepped into a void, but soon I realized it wasn't emptiness at all. It was space. Space for me to breathe, to rebuild, to hear myself again. And yet, even with this new life unfolding around me, the shadows of my old one still followed me in quiet ways. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that David was standing over me, ready to throw another betrayal in my face. Sometimes I would walk past a restaurant window and for a split second imagine I'd see Amanda inside, her eyes glittering with self-righteous satisfaction. Trauma doesn't vanish with legal signatures. It lingers, settling into your bones. One evening, while closing my office, I caught my reflection in the glass door. My hair was pulled into a sleek knot, my posture upright, my expression calm and assured. But behind my eyes, I saw the memory of that dining room table, those photographs, those accusing stares. I leaned closer to the glass, whispering softly, almost as if to that ghost staring back at me. You survived. That simple affirmation carried me through the weeks when exhaustion threatened to drag me back into despair. My firm grew quickly, faster than I'd ever imagined. Women reached out in whispers, in late-night emails and trembling phone calls. Stories poured in different names, different families, different betrayals, but all of them threaded with the same core: men who underestimated families, who plotted systems designed to erase them. I listened. I advised. I fought beside them. And slowly I realized that what I had endured had not been just for me. My pain had become a blueprint, my survival a lesson others could use. But the family I left behind didn't vanish completely. One afternoon, while reviewing documents at a cafe, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Low, controlled, but tinged with panic. I turned, and there was George, David's father, sitting 2 tables away, speaking urgently into his phone. Yes, I know the accounts are frozen. We can't move anything else until this settles. No, Eleanor doesn't know. I'll tell her when she's calmer. He caught sight of me just as I caught sight of him. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. His eyes widened, shame flashing across his face like lightning. He fumbled to end the call, muttered something about the weather, and left in a hurry, his coat flapping like a broken wing. I sat there, my coffee growing cold, my hands trembling slightly. They were still unraveling. Their empire, once so carefully guarded, was crumbling under the weight of their own secrets. And I hadn't lifted a finger. That night I lay awake thinking about what it means to watch your enemies destroy themselves. Part of me wanted to feel triumph. But another part, quieter, deeper, felt only sorrow. Because behind all the scheming, all the betrayal, there was Once a girl in her 20s, who wanted nothing more than to belong to a family. And in chasing that dream, she had ignored every red flag until the dream itself turned to ash. I thought about Amanda most often. Out of all of them, she had been the most vicious, the one who relished my pain, who wanted to see me humiliated. And yet, hadn't her cruelty been a mask too? Hadn't her righteousness been a shield for her own fears of inadequacy? Sometimes I wondered if Amanda ever lay awake at night, haunted by her own reflection. Weeks later, I found out. I was leaving the courthouse after consulting with a client when I heard someone call my name. I turned and there she was, Amanda. She looked nothing like the immaculately polished woman who once commanded the family dining table. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes a little wrinkled, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Sophie," she said, her voice brittle. For a long moment I just stared at her, waiting for the venom, the accusations, the smug righteousness. But none came. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were so soft, so un-Amanda, that I almost didn't believe them. "I never thought it would go this far." She continued, her gaze darting to the ground. "I thought I was protecting David, protecting all of us. I didn't realize what we were really doing." I crossed my arms, not out of hostility, but out of instinct to protect myself. "You tried to destroy me." She winced, nodding. "I know, and I can't take it back. But, Sophie, everything's falling apart. Dad's lost half his contacts. Mom's drowning herself in charity events she can't afford. David." Her voice broke. "David's drinking more than ever. And me, I'm barely keeping my job. I don't know who we are anymore." I studied her for a long time. Part of me wanted to spit back the pain she had given me, to remind her of every cruel word, every scheme. But another part, the part that had grown since leaving them, saw something else. A broken woman standing in the ruins of her own making. "You made your choices," I said quietly, "and you'll have to live with them, just like I lived with mine." Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned away before I could see them fall. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her, only pity. That night, as I recounted the encounter to Laura, she frowned. "Do you believe her? That she's sorry?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe she just regrets losing what she thought she had. Either way, it doesn't change what happened." Laura reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Just promise me you won't let their misery drag you back in." I nodded, though in my heart I knew Amanda's apology would haunt me. Not because I wanted her forgiveness, but because it reminded me that beneath betrayal, people are still human, flawed, fragile, capable of regret. Winter arrived, and with it came new battles at work. My firm handled cases that broke my heart, stories that mirrored mine so closely I sometimes had to step outside and catch my breath. Yet every time I guided a client through the storm, I felt a piece of myself heal too. One late evening, I sat alone in my office, looking at the city lights. I thought about David. Not the cheating husband, not the arrogant son, but the man I once fell in love with. Did he ever miss me? Did he ever think about the nights we stayed up talking about dreams, about the way we once laughed in the kitchen over burnt pasta? Or had he erased those memories just as he tried to erase me from his life? I'll never know. What I do know is this: the man I loved never truly existed. He was a mask, a performance, a story I wanted to believe. And sometimes when the mask slips, the best thing you can do is stop chasing it and learn to write your own story. On New Year's Eve, Laura and I stood on my balcony, glasses of champagne in hand. Fireworks exploded in the distance, painting the sky with sparks. She turned to me, her smile soft. "To new beginnings," she toasted. I raised my glass, to never underestimating ourselves again. As midnight rang in, I closed my eyes and felt the weight of the past year fall away. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't defined by betrayal. I was defined by survival, by growth, by the fire I had walked through and emerged from, scarred, yes, but unbroken. And deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Not for me, not for them. Betrayal is never a closed book. It lingers, weaving through futures, shaping who we become. But for the first time, I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. Spring crept in slowly, as if the city itself was hesitant to shed the weight of winter. By then, nearly a year had passed since that infamous dinner, and yet the echoes of it lingered like the faint smell of smoke after a fire. I often thought betrayal would fade with time, that it would become a dull memory filed away in the archives of my life. But betrayal has a way of seeping into the corners of your soul. It doesn't just live in your mind, it rearranges how you see the world. Every smile is questioned, every promise weighed, every gesture measured against the memory of lies. And yet, despite the scars, I was building something beautiful. My firm had grown beyond what I imagined. We weren't just helping women navigate divorces, we were guiding them through survival, through transformation. Our offices became sanctuaries where women came in broken and left with pieces of themselves stitched back together. Each story I heard reminded me that pain is universal, and so is resilience. But life, with its cruel sense of irony, had more lessons waiting. One Thursday afternoon, as rain tapped steadily against my office windows, my receptionist buzzed me. "Sophie, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's urgent." I frowned. "Who is it?" A pause, then Jessica. I hesitated, then sighed. "Send her in." She entered cautiously, clutching her bag like a lifeline. Her eyes darted around the room before finally settling on me. For a woman who had once been bold enough to flaunt her affair with my husband, she looked startlingly small. "Jessica," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "What brings you here?" She lowered herself into the chair, her voice trembling. "It's David." The name alone still had the power to make my stomach tighten. "What about him?" She swallowed. "He's in trouble. Serious trouble. Drinking, gambling debts. People are coming after him. He—" Her voice cracked. "He asked me to talk to you. Said you're the only one who can help." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "And why would I help him?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because despite everything, he's still your husband." I laughed bitterly. "Ex-husband, and you should know better than anyone what he's capable of." She nodded quickly. "I do. I know. But Sophie, he's unraveling. I don't think he'll survive this without someone stepping in." Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken memories. David's betrayals, his arrogance, his lies. Part of me wanted to slam the door on his misery and let karma finish the work it had started. But another part, the part that still remembered the boyish grin, the dreams we once shared, hesitated. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked softly. Jessica wiped her cheeks. "Because I care about him even after everything, and because you're the only one who ever truly knew him. The real him." The words struck something deep within me. Did I ever truly know him? Or had I fallen in love with a mask so convincing I convinced myself it was real? That night I couldn't sleep. Memories of David flooded me, our early years when we were young and foolish and full of hope. The man who once held my hand during thunderstorms, who whispered promises under blankets, who dreamed of building something lasting. Was that man ever real? Or just the first act of a performance that ended in betrayal? By morning I decided I would see him, not to save him, but to face him one final time, to close the door completely. We met at a dimly lit bar he now frequented. The smell of stale beer clung to the air, and when I saw him, my heart sank. He was thinner, his once sharp suit replaced by a wrinkled shirt. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking slightly as he lifted his glass. "Sophie," he said hoarsely, almost reverently. I slid into the booth across from him, folding my hands. "David." For a long moment, he just stared, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the ghost of the wife he once knew. "You look strong," he finally muttered. "I am," I said simply. He flinched at my tone. Then his shoulders slumped. "I made a mess of everything." I raised an eyebrow. "That's an understatement." His laugh was hollow. "I thought I was clever. Thought I could have it all. You, Jessica, the business, the family. And now," he gestured around the dingy bar, "now look at me." I studied him carefully. For the first time there was no arrogance, no smugness, just a broken man drowning in the consequences of his own choices. "Why did you call me here?" I asked. His voice cracked. "Because you were always the only one who saw me, the only one who believed in me, and I threw it all away. I don't deserve your help, Sophie, but I had to tell you I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. I had dreamed of hearing them once. In the darkest nights after discovering his betrayal, I had imagined him on his knees begging for forgiveness. But now that the words were here, they didn't bring peace. They brought emptiness. Because apologies don't rebuild trust. They don't erase years of lies. They don't stitch back a heart that has already learned to beat without you. I stood slowly, leaving money for my untouched drink. I don't know if you're sorry, David, or if you're just sorry you lost, but either way, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not here to save you. His eyes filled with desperation. So that's it. You're just going to walk away? I met his gaze steadily. I walked away a long time ago. You just didn't notice. As I left the bar, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time, I felt the weight of him lift completely. His apology hadn't healed me, but it had confirmed what I already knew: I was never going back. The following week, Eleanor sent another message. We need you. The family isn't the same. I didn't even hesitate before deleting it. Because finally, I understood I had spent years searching for belonging in a family that would never see me as more than convenient. But I no longer needed their acceptance. I no longer needed their table. I was building my own. That spring, I hosted a small dinner party in my apartment. Laura sat at my right, Jessica at my left, along with a handful of women I had met through my work. We laughed, we shared stories, we raised glasses to survival. As I looked around my modest dining table, I felt something swell in my chest. This was family. Not by blood, not by marriage, but by choice, by loyalty, by shared resilience. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. But deep inside, I also knew the story wasn't finished. David's world was still unraveling. Amanda's guilt was still gnawing. Eleanor's longing was still reaching. They would cross my path again, I could feel it. Betrayal doesn't vanish. It lingers in the shadows, waiting for the next chapter. Summer arrived with its heavy heat, and with it a sense of finality I hadn't expected. It had been over a year since that night at the dining table, since Amanda's triumphant accusations and my quiet unveiling of the truth. A year since David's downfall began. A year since I discovered that the family I had once sacrificed everything for was nothing more than a facade, one that cracked the moment I stopped playing my part. Yet life has a way of circling back, of testing wounds to see if they've truly healed. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. I was at the farmer's market filling my basket with peaches when I heard someone call my name. I turned, and there stood Eleanor. She looked older, years older than the 12 months since I'd last seen her. Her once perfectly coiffed hair was streaked with gray, her posture stooped as though she carried stones in her pockets. But her eyes were the same. Sharp, assessing, filled with both calculation and something almost like pleading. Sophie, she said softly, stepping closer. I froze. The market bustled around us, but in that moment it felt as though the world had narrowed to just her and me. I've missed you, she whispered. We've all missed you. I almost laughed. Missed me. They had plotted to erase me. They had ripped me apart at their table, their voices sharp with judgment, their hands eager to sign away my place in their empire. And now she claimed they missed me. What do you want, Eleanor? I asked, my voice steady. Her lips trembled. Things aren't the same. George, he hardly leaves the house. Amanda, she's not herself. And David, she paused, swallowing hard. David's falling apart. We can't reach him. Her words should have softened me, but instead they hardened something deep inside. Because what she really meant was, we need you to clean up the mess we made. I shook my head. I gave years of my life to your family. I gave loyalty, love, trust. And when I needed you, you gave me betrayal. Whatever happens to David now is no longer my burden. Her eyes filled with tears. Please, Sophie, we were wrong. I was wrong. I studied her, the weight of her words sinking in. Maybe she meant them. Maybe she didn't. But forgiveness isn't just about words, it's about actions. And theirs had spoken loud enough. I turned away, leaving her among the peaches and the bustling crowd. I didn't look back. That night I stood on my balcony staring at the city lights. For so long I had been haunted by the need for closure, by the hope that someday they would admit their cruelty, that someday they would beg for forgiveness. But now, having heard Eleanor's plea, I realized something profound. I didn't need their remorse. I didn't need their apologies. Because I had already closed that chapter myself. The real closure had come the moment I chose myself over them. Still, life isn't just about endings. It's about what you build in their place. 6 months later, my firm hosted its first annual conference, an event dedicated to empowering women, navigating betrayal, divorce, and financial battles. Hundreds of women attended. As I stood at the podium looking out at their faces, I felt a swell of pride, unlike anything I had ever known. This isn't just about legal battles, I told them, my voice carrying through the hall. This is about reclaiming your story, about understanding that betrayal doesn't define you, it refines you. It burns away the illusions until all that's left is your true self. And that self is stronger than you ever imagined. The applause that followed was thunderous, but more than the sound, it was the look in their eyes that struck me. Hope, determination, a recognition of their own resilience reflected back at them. Afterward, as I mingled with attendees, a woman approached me with trembling hands. "You don't know me," she said, "but your story saved me. I watched your interview, I read your firm's blog, and I realized I wasn't alone. I left my husband because of you, and for the first time I feel free." Tears pricked my eyes as I hugged her, because in that moment I understood the true purpose of everything I had endured. My suffering had not been wasted, it had become a light for someone else lost in the dark. That evening, after the conference ended, I sat alone in the empty hall. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, but my heart glowed with something fierce. Revenge had started my journey, but purpose, that was what would carry me forward. Weeks later, Jessica and I met for dinner. Our unlikely friendship had blossomed into something real, something almost sisterly. Over wine, she told me David had left town, rumors swirling of debts and failed ventures. Amanda had moved into a smaller apartment, her pride chipped away. Eleanor still sent me messages I never answered. "They're all falling apart," Jessica said, shaking her head. "And you're thriving," I smiled faintly. "That's the difference between us. They built their lives on lies. I built mine on truth." Jessica raised her glass, to truth and to karma. As we clinked glasses, I felt the weight of the past lift even more. Because she was right, karma had done its work. I hadn't needed to destroy them, they had destroyed themselves. And me, I had rebuilt, stronger, wiser, freer. On the anniversary of that dinner, the night of the photographs, the night they thought they had cornered me, I sat alone on my balcony with a glass of wine. The city lights shimmered below, the air warm and gentle. I thought about Sophie Bennett, age 32, the woman who once walked into that dining room terrified she would lose everything. She did lose everything, but in losing it she found herself. I raised my glass to the sky, whispering softly, "Thank you." Not to David, not to Eleanor, not even to Amanda, but to the lesson, to the betrayal that became my teacher, to the wound that forced me to grow, to the fire that forged me into something stronger. And as I sipped my wine, I realized this revenge had been sweet. But what lingered wasn't the taste of vengeance. It was the taste of freedom. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. It's about rising so high that the people who tried to bury you can no longer reach you. It's about living so fully that their betrayal becomes nothing more than a footnote in your story. And that more than anything they could ever take from me was my victory. So if you're watching this now, if you've ever been betrayed, discarded, underestimated, remember my story. Remember that endings are not always tragedies. Sometimes they are beginnings in disguise. I rebuilt, you can too. And if my story touched you, if it made you think about your own strength, then I hope you'll join me here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of survival, betrayal, and transformation. And tell me in the comments, what has betrayal taught you about yourself? Because in the end, that's the lesson. Betrayal doesn't break you, it reveals you.